Welcome to the Pipeline Online Podcast. In this episode, we have Minister of Crown Investments Corporation, Jeremy Harrison. We've brought him back because the province of Saskatchewan just made a big announcement. We are going to rebuild our coal fleet. It has huge implications not just for power generation, but the oil patch as well. Hi, folks. It's today is June 20th, and we've got some of the biggest news that Pipeline Online has ever broke. The government of Saskatchewan is going to be rebuilding its coal fleet. We got Bronwyn Eyre here, who not only is my co-host, but actually had a big part in this over the years. And adding to the stage, we have Jeremy Harrison, Minister of Crown Investments Corporation, and including SaskPower. So I don't want to do too much talking here. Jeremy, you got a lot to say. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, thanks, Brian, and thanks, Bronwyn. I really appreciate joining the podcast again. Really, very exciting news. I mean, the government has spent a number of months working through the process of making the decision with regard to coal fleet extension. Probably not a surprise to regular listeners here, Brian, the direction that I had been leading in for some time, but the commitment that had been provided, I had given to our hardworking employees at SaskPower, particularly at Poplar and at Shand and Boundary, was that they would have certainty about what that future was going to look like by July the 1st. So I informed our team by letter a couple of days ago now that the government had made the decision that we were going to be extending the lives of our coal fleet. That will be beginning with the repair of Boundary Dam Unit 4 and the recertification of that unit as well. And then we're going to be working through the life extension and refurbishment of the other coal units at Boundary Dam, at Poplar River, and at Shand. So we're still kind of working through the technical details as to what that sequencing will be, but we will be starting to procure long lead items this year. We will be obviously. We've already started work on the repair of Boundary Dam Unit 4. So all of that is underway, and I just really want to thank our team, and I also want to thank the municipal governments in Estevan, at the RM of Estevan, at Coronach, at the RM of Hart Butte, RM of Coalfields. And I want to thank as well IBEW and the United Mine Workers, who have all really made some very, very valuable contributions, submissions, and really been partners as we've worked through this process on kind of a whole number of different levels, including very technically. I want to thank IBEW and UMWA for the really technical support they gave us in a lot of this as well. So this has been a team effort and a team process, and at the end of the day, the beneficiaries are going to be the people of this province who are going to be assured of energy security, reliable power production as we move forward into the future and as we move to baseload nuclear power generation, which is the plan over the long term.
Well, congratulations, Jeremy. I think it's a great announcement. I think it would be helpful for listeners and people out there just to hear the arc of how we got to this point. So if you could just give us kind of the Coles notes on, why and when coal was phased out in the province initially, how that worked its way through the Trudeau years. And I think also of some help would be the status or state of play of the facilities as they were before this announcement, and what the plan was for them before, and where they're all at now. I think that would be just helpful to get a sense of from you.
Sure. Well, I mean, Bronwyn, you could add a lot to this as well. I mean, you were at the cabinet table through a great deal of all of these decisions. So I want to thank you for your contribution to all of this and support and the work really as Minister of Justice, particularly through the Saskatchewan First Act, and as well on the tribunal that actually went through and adjudicated the clean electricity regulations and the cost that those regulations would incur to the people of this province, multi-billion-dollar costs, thousands of jobs that would be lost if we were to adhere to those regulations, literally a 108% rate increase that would be put on to SaskPower ratepayers tomorrow actually probably a year ago, if we were to have been adhering to the clean electricity regulations, which are ultra vires beyond the scope of the government of Canada, as are some of the other regulatory items in here. So So really, I've been very clear in saying, based on the work that the tribunal had done and that the Ministry of Justice had done under your leadership, that we view these regulations as being entirely illegitimate. We don't recognize the authority of the Government of Canada in this space, and we're going to make a decision, which we did, on the basis of what is really best for the province of Saskatchewan. And that decision was made on the basis of energy security. We have coal. This is what we have here in this province. We know what it cost 20 years ago, which was zero. We know what it's going to cost today, which is zero. And we know what it's going to cost 20 years from now, which is zero. And the reason it's zero is because it's owned by the people of this province. And we have hundreds of years of supply of that fuel source within literally kilometers of the facilities that we're going to be life extending. So why would we be importing, whether it be gas from Ontario or from Alberta or the United States, or renewables are an important part of our power system, but they're not base load. So this is what we have. If we had hydro like British Columbia or Quebec, we'd be doing that as well, but we don't. So we made this decision on the basis of what is best for the people of this province, the actual core of our baseload power generation. In that January 20th scenario, the highest demand load that you're going to have, it's 6 o'clock at night, it's minus 40. You need the power to work. There is no alternative. And in that scenario, it's 100% baseload because there is no solar being generated. You have to shut wind turbines down when it's that cold. They can't work. They're not generating a single megawatt. You have to rely on your base load. And that means for us, coal and natural gas. And coal is going to continue to play a huge role in that and is a pillar of our system.
Right.
There's a few things that you hit on there, Jeremy, that I want to unpack a little bit. First of all, a lot of people say, okay, well, why don't we just burn natural gas? Well, the reality is that other than gas that comes up with oil, Saskatchewan has pretty much depleted its natural gas reserves. We've drilled 10 gas wells in the last decade, and actually some of those might have been helium wells. Mm-hmm. So the reality is that Alberta drilled 10 gas wells by noon today. And so 92%, I believe you said in committee, of our gas comes from Alberta, which means that according to the last year's annual report, I know you're doing a new annual report next week for SaskPower. In 2023, we spent $450 odd million on natural gas, which goes to Alberta. That was before Great Plains went online. That's before Aspen goes online. So adding two of those will probably increase our volume by 50%. And the fact that natural gas is doubling in price due to LNG Canada going online, and all the futures are showing $4 a gigajoule instead of $2 a gigajoule, it will be spending in very short order, just with the natural gas fleet we have without expansion, probably $1.3 billion a year for money that goes to Alberta. Now, if they have a 17% royalty, just as a rough number, that means the Alberta will be getting over $200 million in royalties from them. The rest will be going to Alberta oil companies that produce that natural gas, and every dollar of that is leaving Saskatchewan, whereas we pay ourselves $25 million a year in coal royalties, which because it's our coal, taken from one pocket, put in the other pocket. As you said, it's essentially free. And I think most people don't really understand how important of a consideration that is. Or is it an important consideration? You tell me.
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, you said it very well, Brian. That's exactly right. I mean, when we're importing gas, and I wish we had the gas reserves that Alberta or British Columbia do, but we don't. We've been very fortunate in that, because of the nature of how gas is transported in this country, that we've been able to actually secure gas at very reasonable rates over the last number of years. But there have been occasions where gas has spiked up to very, very significant levels. Different reasons for that at different times. But the reality is, and I think this is a good thing for the country, frankly, that as we're able to actually move more gas to Tidewater, LNG Canada just coming online now is a good example of it. I hope we can move even more gas to Tidewater into the future. But we're going to be paying the global commodity price for gas, which is a very, very different rate than what SaskPower have been able to secure gas for our plants over the last number of years. So to extrapolate out over the long term a gas price based on kind of the $1 to $1.50 sort of scenario is just not a realistic scenario over the long term. In fact, we don't know what the price of gas is going to be 10 years from now, other than the fact that it's probably going to be a lot higher. That's probably what we can extrapolate. If folks knew exactly what it was, they'd be working on a commodities desk in New York, but we don't actually know what the number is going to be, other than it's likely going to go significantly higher. So even gas at $4, and I think Henry Hub's usually around $4 an MMBTU. That would mean that would be doubling the cost of the resource for our natural gas plants. So we know, like I said, the certainty and security of coal. We know what the price is going to be because we own it and we know where it is, and we have hundreds of years of supply within kilometers of the plants that are going to be burning it. So it makes sense from an energy security perspective. I think inarguably makes sense from a energy security perspective, but also it's a part of an all of the above approach. Gas is an important part of it. It is our largest single source of generation most days, although as was rightfully pointed out, just a couple of weeks ago, we had our first coal day where we were producing more from coal. And I think you'll probably see a bit more of that as we go forward too, actually. For some operational reasons, but we are going to be in that spot. So gas is an important part of that. We will be doing more gas as well, by the way. We announced just a number of weeks ago, I announced some new renewable projects as well. And there are likely to be some more renewable generation that comes on stream as well. Biomass has come on stream here in the last couple of years in this province. We've maxed out our hydro generation opportunity, but hydro is still a component of our power grid as well, and really an important part of our power grid in the north. I might talk a bit about that as we go forward here. But this is an all of the above approach as we bridge to baseload nuclear power generation, which really is going to be the future here out into the long term. We don't know specifically what those timelines are going to be yet, because there are a lot of intangibles in that. And we're going to be working through those. But for the same reason that coal makes sense from an energy security perspective, nuclear makes sense from an energy security perspective in Saskatchewan, in that the uranium comes out of the ground here in Saskatchewan. So that is going to be the future, but we're going to get there by bridging through continuing to life extend our coal plants.
I'm just going to, before I throw us to Bronwyn here, and there's a lot of questions I have from what you just said regarding both nuclear and January. But folks, if you're watching right now, whatever format you're watching on, if you type in the comments a comment or a question, assuming you're not a jerk, I can pull it up here. People can see it. We can discuss it if it bears discussion. If any of you folks are working the power industry for coal miners or electrical workers that are off today, you want to say something to the minister, you get a chance in the next 40 minutes. So Bronwyn, you're up.
I guess if we had still had Stephen Guilbeault in the environment chair federally, we would have expected by now, or you would have expected by now, Jeremy, a pretty outspoken response to this announcement that was made. What has the reaction been from the feds, if anything, to the announcement, and what do you perhaps expect it to be? And equally, what are we hearing from the opposition?
That is a very, very good question, Bronwyn. This was no surprise to the federal government. Since Mark Carney has become Prime Minister, we've been very clear with the Government of Canada about the direction that we're going in, and equally clear that we didn't believe that they had any standing in the discussion. So what was announced this week was not a surprise to the Government of Canada with regard to our need and decision to extend the life of our thermal coal facilities. They have not yet commented publicly with regard to the announcement. They've seen it. Obviously, we provided that. We didn't tell them the exact date that we were going to be making the announcement, but I've had this discussion with a couple of federal ministers very directly, and with senior officials in the Prime Minister's office very directly about where we were going. I would say this: I think the federal government have a understanding as to why this is a necessity for the province of Saskatchewan to go in, and I think as well, they have an understanding of the unique circumstance that we are in as far as our energy security needs and the reliability of our grid needs, which really are very different than other jurisdictions in Canada. I would say that there is a less ideological approach that I have seen from them since Carney became Prime Minister. I would say that I'm encouraged by conversations I've had with folks like Tim Hodgson, who actually understands Saskatchewan really well, who did work for the Crown Investments Corporation many years ago, who understands our industry here. I am concerned, I would say, in a more macro context about the realities of the Liberal Party of Canada, which I think, even though we have good intention from individuals who are in senior positions in government right now, I have a degree of concern about where the Liberal Party are going to end up pushing them to as well. But we would have made this decision one way or the other, whether it was Justin Trudeau and Stephen Guilbeault or Mark Carney and Tim Hodgson. This is really the only decision that the government could come to. So I would say on that, this is not a surprise to them. And I've also been very open with them and saying we want to work with them and partner with them on nuclear. I mean, if their objective really is to get to zero emissions electricity production, we have an answer, and it is nuclear. So I think for them, there is an opportunity here that really would create a national project that would benefit provinces right across the country, whether it be Ontario, whether it be Alberta, whether it be Saskatchewan. Talked to Nate Newdorf about this from Alberta just a couple of days ago. We had a very good discussion about what that might look like. But I really think that, and I've had the discussion with the federal government in very much the same regard. There really is I think a grand bargain to be had here, where as a partnership, the federal government, who would be financial partners in deploying nuclear, I mean, they have a very legitimate role in that space. We would work with them very, very hand in glove in how we get there. So I would say that. As far as the opposition, I actually was a bit surprised. I mean, they came out just in complete opposition to the direction government is taking on this. I'm glad they were very open.
Just one second. I'm going to pull up the comments on that.
Sure.
So it's going to be in two parts here. This is a statement from Alina Young, Shadow Minister for Jobs and Economy. She also does SaskPower. She's been doing that in a previous capacity as well. So this is the first part of her comment. Won't allow me to do the whole thing. Just a second here. Okay, so we'll show that. So she said, for 18 years, Saskatchewan Party has raised your power bills. They continue to tax families on groceries and clothing too. Then, let's see the next part here. And then she said, there is nothing in today's announcement to cut your costs or to plan for the future.
Wow.
Investment should be made in power plants that will operate beyond 2050 and are resilient to future policy changes. At province, hold on here. It's a little cumbersome. I apologize, people. She says, at the provincial and federal levels. Then she's got one more sentence here. Might have to break this up a bit.
This is news to me as well. I hadn't read this previously. So
and then she says, at the time, we see extreme weather events like wildfires and droughts made worse by climate change. And last one here. We need to be doing more to reduce emissions from power generation in Saskatchewan. So, this is, I mean, the NDP has been a little bit more practical in the last year and a half or so regarding power generation. This seems to be a bit more of a reversion to the past about, the greenhouse gas emissions are more important than anything. It definitely seems to harken back to, previous NDP stances on that. Thoughts from both of you, please.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it surprised me a bit given where they've been on some of these issues. But this is actually who they are. They really are. They really do believe that coal plants should be immediately shut down. They really do agree with Stephen Guilbeault and Justin Trudeau's approach to regulation and legislation. They really would. And it actually said it almost explicitly in there, saying future provincial policy changes. Well, who in heaven's name would that be coming from? I can tell you, we've announced where we're going on this. But they all but admitted, which we already knew, which is that if they ever had the chance to form government, they would immediately shut down coal. They would put 1,100 people and families out of work. They would devastate 2 communities in the process of doing that, and they would undermine the integrity of our power grid as well.
Well,
That's actually what they would do.
The big thing here is that the biggest threat to this is not technology, and it's not even really financial. The biggest threat to our power grid is a change in government, either at the federal or provincial level. If the federal government somehow, I don't know if they're going to send the 3 Mounties they have left that aren't on leave to shut down each power plant, or if they're going to send the army, which doesn't have any equipment anyhow, to shut down Poplar River, which I had on the screen there a minute ago. It's government that is the threat here. And if the NDP, how do you deal with this where if the NDP does form government 3.5 years from now, could they potentially say, well, no, we're going to turn the lights off? What is the alternative? What could we possibly have if we do turn these off? We can't get a coal thing turned on in a day, or nuclear. And, you talked about the January scenario. That actually happened 18 months ago in Alberta, where they were on the verge of the lights going out. I think it was the week of January 13th to the 16th. They had 3 days of grid alerts, 4 rounds of grid alerts in that many days, and they just about lost the grid in temperatures was minus 37. So the scenario you talked about absolutely does happen. Absolutely. And in Saskatchewan, we had 7 days. Rupen Pandya, CEO of SaskPower, said we had 7 days where we had effectively no wind in January. So what are the options that the NDP can offer if not this?
Well, Bronwyn, do you want to? I know you were looking to get in here. I'll let you maybe take a crack at it. Then I have some thoughts beyond that too.
Well, I mean, I think that's why it's so important to do this now, because I mean, certainly as an economic response to, call it affordability, call it what you will. I mean, it's just the only practical option as a bridge in this province. And Jeremy knows, I mean, I've been a hothead on this for a long time. I always felt that, precisely to your point, Brian, come and drag the workers out then, feds, if you want to shut this thing down. I mean, we don't have hydro. Manitoba's run out, has no more to give. There are the issues that Jeremy's raised with natural gas. That's just a practical, objective fact. On the hydro front, on the natural gas front, there are certain challenges there. Yes, we've been lucky over the years and have secured relatively good rates and the rest. And thank God we did it, because we know that Wilkinson and co were coming after natural gas a few years ago too. So yes,
they still are under the CR.
Yeah, and I mean, with hindsight, should we have done this earlier? Probably, but here we are now, and it's very important as the bridge, as Jeremy has said, to nuclear. And there simply isn't enough wind to power the grid. There simply isn't enough solar. So the ideological statement which Ms. Young has made is just that, ideological. It's impractical. It's dangerous in a province that goes down to minus 50, and it hurts workers. It hurts workers. It hurts all those groups whom Jeremy raised off the top, from the boiler makers down, who need the work, who've been wanting this for a long time, and it sustains communities. How could you possibly say you can do anything else? It just has to be. So I don't get it. But at least she's showing her true colors.
Yeah, and I would say that, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, they're being honest. I give them credit for that. They're being honest. They would shut down coal and they have no option to replace it with. And they would probably say, well, we can build more wind and solar and this sort of thing. Well, on January 20th, when it's 6:00 at night, none of that works. None of that works. So what are you going to do in that situation? And I think their answer would say, well, we can import power from Manitoba or Alberta. Well, Manitoba has no power to export. I mean, that's actually the reality of where Manitoba at. Ron, when you rightfully pointed out, they have maxed out their hydro. The reason that they canceled their contract with the United States wasn't some sort of elbows up thing. It was because they actually needed to have the power to keep the lights on in Manitoba. As far as Alberta, I mean, the Alberta's grid, I mean, we can probably talk about some of that, and Brian well knows, but talk about a lesson in what not to do.
Absolutely.
And who to put that on? Well, ask Rachel Notley and the Alberta NDP how they managed to get the province in 4 years, in only 4 years, they managed to undermine the entire integrity of the Alberta electrical grid by massively overbuilding renewables to the point where, as Brian well said, they have a hard time keeping the lights on in winter.
And, I mean, one of the things I've said frequently in my editorials is that Alberta has more coal, oil, and gas than God, because God gave all of his to Alberta. And the only way a jurisdiction that's that blessed with such energy riches can go into, the lights possibly going out is by sheer incompetence at the top. And, and I've kind of, made a threatening comment that if Saskatchewan does that, I'll be saying the same thing about Saskatchewan too. I've got a couple comments here. I definitely want to get Lori Cars up, because I had it up earlier, but she was a bit a part of this as well. She represents Estevan, and I think Coronach now falls into her new riding. It's been adjusted. She says it's the most common sense decision for power generation, community of Estevan, the workers in their power plants, coal miners, the province of Saskatchewan as a whole, reliability and affordability. And Lori's been fighting this, tooth and nail. I want to get a brief comment on that, and then we have to go to an ad. We have 2 ads due here today, so it's if you want to comment on Lori here.
Oh, well, I do. Thanks, Brian. And look, I mean, Minister Carr and Minister Merritt have been incredible proponents for their communities of Estevan and region and Coronach. They have really, really made the case over a long period of time about why this makes sense. Their constituents should know that. What strong supporters both David and Lori have been for the employees in Estevan and in Coronach and surrounding regions, and what it means for the communities to keep these plants going for their communities, which really, in the case of Coronach, this is the industry. This is what the community is based on. And for Estevan, this is a huge employer that, in a city that is the energy city, this really is the identity of the community. So I want to give great thanks to Lori and David, and also to the municipal leadership who right across the board have been united in supporting the approach that we're taking, and very, very helpful in moving in this direction, and helpful in providing input and support for where we ended up here.
Just going to go to an ad here for a second. We'll be back in 30 seconds, folks. For your well servicing needs in southeast Saskatchewan and southwest Manitoba, you need the General. That's General Well Servicing of Cardiff, Saskatchewan. They've got a fleet of double, triple rigs, pressure vessels, and lighting rentals ready to serve you. They can perform rig assist and frac assist operations as well. Call Kevin at 306-482-3244. That's Call the General at 306-482-3244. Yes, sir. Okay, folks, I got a couple comments here. I really want to get involved. We got Joe. First of all, we got very briefly here. We got Quick Dick McDick saying extend coal, long-term nuke. This is the way. The voice of Saskatchewan. And this is really important. We got Jody Ducart, who is with the United Mine Workers. So thanks for the platform today. This is great news for the province. Thank you all for the hard work making this decision. And then he adds, if anyone follows the Alberta power grid in winter months, this makes sense. Now,
Texas.
Ryan Dion, who is a big follower of the webpage, takes a little bit issue with that. He says the failure in Alberta was due to thermal generation failing. They knew there was no wind on those days. Now, I take issue with this, and he and I have had some discussion on this, because, okay, out of the 50 or 60 thermal units, a couple went down, but all 1,700 wind turbines produce nothing, and they get a pass. The expectation is that one or two thermal things have an issue. Oh my God, it's the end of the world. But the entire fleet of wind and solar at the same time can and did fail that time in January. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that there, Jeremy.
Well, I would just say thanks for the comments. Quick Dick, who is actually the voice of Saskatchewan, I appreciate his commentary. That is right on. And Jody, I want to thank Jody. Jody didn't kind of allude to it in his comments there, but Jody is the UMWA local president and has been greatly helpful in all of this. And Jody also is a counselor on the Arma Coalfields. So I want to thank him for his input, support, and direct engagement in a lot of elements of all of this. So these are good folks who are working to defend their communities, defending their members, defending the livelihoods of a lot of people in Southeast Saskatchewan. And I really just want to commend them for the work that's been done there. But I want to talk about the other union involved here, IBEW, which represents the power workers at both
at all three power plants, but also the miners at Coronach.
Yeah.
And I talked to Ken Hosty, who's the assistant business manager, shortly after this went public on Wednesday afternoon. And he said he had over 100 calls and texts from his membership. They were ecstatic. And one really stuck out to him. He said, this gentleman was thinking of quitting. They'd basically given up. They're looking at moving west. And now they don't have to. They can stay in Saskatchewan. They can stay at their job. They don't have to move. And he had tears in his eyes as he's talking. You could hear it over the phone, because this is how impactful this has been for the power workers and the miners.
Well, I appreciate that, and Ken's a friend of mine, and who has really done some remarkable work with IBW. But at the end of the day, which I think a lot of commentators or academics or these types who are super opposed to all of this don't get, this is about people. This is about real humans who have jobs and families who are dependent on this. I remember Chrystia Freeland telling me once, when she was going through this process about, we're going to, save the world with this regulation that they're putting in, that she was going to, what their plan was is to train these folks for green jobs of the future. I said, go tell a coal miner in Southeast Saskatchewan that what you're doing is saving the world, but don't worry, they're going to be out of work, but you're going to train them for a green job of the future. Mm-hmm. Well, what the heck is that? I mean, give me a break. Well, this is how these leftists look at the world, though, that somehow, well, this is all just collateral damage. And we're seeing it from the Sask NDP here today that, who cares about the 1,100 people and their families that are dependent on these jobs? Who cares? Because we're somehow going to save the world by shutting down 3 coal plants, which are 0.0001% of the Chinese coal production grid. Like, give me a break.
Well, I remember back when I was still working with North Battleford from 2003 to 2008, the NDP under Lauren Calvert promised new green jobs, almost word for word what you said. Where were they? I mean, even with the wind turbines that we're building, yes, there are a few jobs, but few is the operative term. Rowan.
Well, just to that point, I mean, Chrystia Freeland reminds me of other comments, and certainly she was, into that whole talk about how the transition was the new industrial revolution, and let's not forget any of that. I mean, and Wilkinson the same. If this was the industrial revolution, I don't recall the industrial revolution being about going backwards and turning off the lights. It was about going forwards and helping people with their economic viability. I mean, that was a huge part of course, where we were at federally just a few months ago, really. And I think people shouldn't forget, when we're talking about the ideological sort of backdrop to this, including the position taken now by the NDP, that transition never happened. In other words, for that community, the feds were always promising these green possibilities for them, to the point that the Southeast and groups in the Southeast had to basically bang on their door to say, such as what have you got? You won't pick up the phone, you won't answer our emails, you promised us a quote unquote transition. It was all talk and a lot of wasted money and non-communication and non-collaboration. And so if the opposition has one carry on from those policies or beliefs, feels that somehow there's going to be this miraculous new green revolution, it never happened. And we've all realized that very, very soberly, now.
Yeah, you're so right, Bronwyn. And, one of the broader criticisms I have of the left, there is never any discussion about what creates wealth in this society, in this country. It's all about how to redistribute the wealth that's being created by the hardworking folks who are in the energy sector, who are in the mining sector. This is actually what creates wealth in the economy that allows them to say, you need to spend, endless amounts more money on fill in the blank. I mean, that's the only part that ever is focused on. There's never a recognition of what actually creates wealth. And it's the hardworking folks like Jody who are in the coal fields, who are mining, who are doing hard work every day. The folks who actually shower after work, not before. You never hear a word about that from people like Alina Young or the NDP, who all they care about in kind of this, urban Eastern outlook that they have is, how do you redistribute that wealth? No recognition of the people who actually create it, no recognition of the industries that generate the opportunity to have those discussions. So that really, it just reinforces it, though, to kind of the true colors are coming through, even though, Carla's tried to present a more moderate face of the NDP. The reality is this is who they are. They hate wealth creating industries. They don't support the people that work in those industries. They're embarrassed by these industries. That's the actual reality.
I'm going to pull up a comment here from Becca Ford. I think she's on council in Estevan, if I'm not mistaken, or is or was. She said, this is the best news of 2025. This gives our workers, mind, and power a sigh of relief. And I'll talk about that in a second. It also gives a broader community sigh of relief. The impact on our mine and power workers spreads across Southeast Saskatchewan, in not only the work they do, but in support of their major not-for-profits like the United Way. Since 2012, the mines and SaskPower workers have donated over $2 million just to that one organization. There's a combo of worker deduction from SaskPower and, I guess, Westmore. She ran out of space there. I want to talk about that for a second. I have to go to another ad here briefly. I went around yesterday and I knocked on a bunch of doors, and I went to Coffee Row and I talked to at least a half dozen, no more than that, probably about 12 people. The relief, the ecstatic things. People, I was walking out of the beef feeder. A guy called me over. Hey, Brian, great story. Come here. And we talked for 20 minutes. It was Lyle Hawkins I spoke to. And, I spoke to a bunch of people, and it's just like, for instance, Bernie Bjorndal of Southern Bolt, and I'll have a story of him. Probably 20% of his business comes from the mines and SaskPower. And he listed off a whole bunch of other businesses that most people wouldn't realize are, highly dependent on the coal industry. Everyone I talked to, it was just like a huge sigh of relief. There has been a pall over Estevan since Mike Marsh in 2018, then CEO of SaskPower, said, we're not doing carbon capture on units 4 and 5. I want to get into that, and I want to get into some of the questions I had here. I posed at the end of my story after a commercial break. We do have a comment here from Jody and from Josh, and then we're going to go to a break, and then we're going to get into some of these questions here. So Jody said, I also want to thank Minister Harrison, Mr. Carr, and the rest of the Saskatchewan Party government for working with the unions, something we have not seen for a long time. We do appreciate you listening to the workers of this province. Now, I want to say this. The fact that a union leader is saying this about a right-wing government is, I think the world is upside down, as Hamilton said.
Well, I would say this. I think you are kind of seeing this evolution across the Western world. North America for sure, where working people, blue-collar, hardworking people understand that socialist parties that presume to represent them really don't. They really don't. And the Sask NDP, showed their colors on this. I want to thank Tyler Holman as well, business manager for IBEW 2067, good friend, who's done incredible work on all of this as well, with whom we've developed a really close working relationship. And it's not just because of coal or SaskPower, but on a whole number of different things. Union-led training being another example where I really am of the view, having been our labor market minister for a long time, you end up with better results. And we've been working with building trades unions particularly on how we can advance union-led training in a number of different spaces. So whether that be with UA, whether that be with the iron workers, we've had some really, really good discussions with leaders in the labor community who, I just see a very bright future, because I think that there is a very close alignment of what our long-term interests. We share these long-term interests, which are economic development, creating opportunity and work for their members, and which government is committed to actually doing that. And I think it's pretty clear that it is our government, the Sask Party government here. So, I think that same process is played out, whether it be in Ontario, the close relationship that Monty McNaughton and Doug Ford have formed with some of the building trades unions there. Even with Pierre Poilievre, you saw a number of unions come out in support of Pierre in the last campaign. And it's because there is a long-term durable alignment of interests in creating opportunity and work and developing the economy and respecting working people, which is something that has far left parties like the NDP.
Okay, so I'm going to go to an ad here. We're going to go through some of the analysis questions here. And Jeremy, you turn into a pumpkin at 10 or at 11 o'clock, correct?
I do.
So Brahma and I will discuss a little bit more after that here. So we'll be right back. There's a reason that HG Jack has dominated Saskatchewan's oil patch. That's because that distinctive curved walking beam reduces energy consumption by about 25%. That means 25% less power bills, 25% less carbon tax. That's a big difference. And it's available exclusively from Grime Sales and Service, Batman, Saskatchewan. So there's a few things I wanted to go over here because this is more than just coal. The reality is that if we are going to keep running our coal fleet, we now have the possibility of reconsidering carbon capture. Now, geologist Gavin Jensen, who works for the Government of Saskatchewan, senior research geologist, did a speech at the Wilson Basin Conference saying, if we put carbon capture on our entire coal fleet, there is the potential to add roughly 75,000 barrels of additional oil production per day across Southeast Saskatchewan. Now, to put that in perspective, folks, that would be like taking the Weyburn unit and adding 3 more Weyburn units. Mm-hmm. That could be done in a Steelman field. That could be done in the Bakken, possibly the Torquay area. So let's talk about, is this something that you're looking at? Is this something that, and I'll follow on more with that in a second. So go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, no, thanks, Brian. And it is, I wrote in the letter that was going to be a part of our consideration as we move through this process. So between Crown Investments Corporation and SaskPower as well, there's been a lot of work that's being done right now. What I've said in the past with regard to carbon capture is we need to make sure the economics work on this. They have to work for SaskPower. They have to work for our private sector partners, and they also have to work from the perspective of the broader economic impact, which comes from having increased oil production. So, we do have an objective of getting to 1 million barrels per day. The Premier reiterated that again just last week in Calgary. We want to get there. And, there are a handful of ways that we're going to be able to get there. We've been, 500,000 or less barrels per day production for quite some time. There was a spike when we had the Weyburn Bakken formation boom. So that was a part of it. But, up in my country in the Northwest, significant increases in thermal oil field generation, I think is a real thing. And though if you're down in the Southeast, it's going to have to be carbon injection. So we're going to work through that. And we have to make sure that the numbers work. But I can say this, that the technology does work. And it has been a journey for SaskPower, absolutely. But we have got to the point now, great work by our engineers and employees at Boundary Dam. Really, this technology is working very well. We're seeing availability rates that are very, very much the same as the other coal-fired units. There are implications for power generation, of course, when you actually attach the CCS unit to coal. But those are what we really have to work through: is how can we make the economics work on this? And if the numbers work, we absolutely are open to adding CCS units to the refurbished coal plants.
Well, and if you do that, then really, do we have to shut down coal at all? Because if we put carbon capture on it, the whole big deal about emissions is largely taken care of. And does there have to be any sunset on the coal industry at that point?
So it's a good question, because when you put carbon capture onto an existing thermal coal plant, basically what you're doing as far as emissions is you're turning it into a natural gas plant, right? You're going from 900 or so tons per gigawatt hour of production to about 300, 350 thereabouts, which is what natural gas emissions are. Which is interesting because under the federal clean electricity regulations, those plants would all be illegal anyway. I mean, this is kind of the point I've made earlier about, like running coal is somehow like double illegal or triple illegal compared to the feds, because running natural gas right now will be illegal anyway. I mean, if we started today building 4 more Aspen stations to replace the coal units that we have, at the cost of like $10 billion. If we started today, they would all be illegal by 2035 anyway. So they'd be just as illegal as us having life extended coal. So this is what I kind of say as far as the federal CER, how just entirely beyond unrealistic any of this is. And the fact that the NDP have completely bought into adherence to the clean electricity regulations says a whole lot. But we don't recognize their legitimacy. They're unmeetable anyway and make utterly no sense. But like I said, when we get to that decision on attaching carbon capture, we're going to be making it for economic reasons and really in the broader provincial interest.
Well, and this really signals, I mean, this announcement obviously signals again a bit of a parting of ways with federal mandates. And I mean, we've been seeing that for a while, but I mean, it all becomes kind of, I mean, the whole thing about CCS before, if we were listening to the feds, was we certainly can't do it on coal. So that's done. You really, I remember, of course, the big thing was do it on natural gas, except that was completely untested technology and massively costly. So, you know, naturally we were a bit wary about that. And I think that the thing is to keep in mind most of all on CCS going forward in this new chapter, if you like, of, you know, going our own economic way really is whether it stays economic.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, I mean, EOR, enhanced oil recovery, in terms of CCS, yes, there are synergies there which make sense for oil production and are good for boosting that. But you know, I mean, then that's, I think, but that's the main thing. If we're luckily now looking at things from a purely economic perspective, that also changes the conversation a little bit on CCS. But
Well,
it's good to know that things are working as well as they are, obviously.
I talked to the executives of Saturn Oil and Gas just a few weeks ago when some of this stuff was coming about, and Justin Kaufman, who's the rock guy, the geologist who's the number 2 there, you know, I explained Gavin Jensen's presentation, and he said, you know, the Weyburn unit is basically a license to print money, and they're interested. And he sent me an email a week later saying, look, they're talking about it internally about where the CO2 is, you know, something they could do. Now, I mean, so there is interest, and the fact that Whitecap is now purchased Varen, or merged, or whatever you want to call it, and Whitecap is, you know, leading the charge here on CO2. I think there's a real potential here that we could get a few companies that actually do want to buy the CO2 if it's available.
Yeah, well, I think that's a possibility, but so those will be a part of the overall discussion. Brian, one of the interesting comments I saw pop up there with regard to the legality. So yeah, I mean, the federal government have in place provisions that would entail things like imprisonment and serious fines and all the rest of it. So what we did, and Bronwyn really spearheaded a lot of this at the Ministry of Justice, what we did about a year and a half ago, when we moved on the consumer carbon tax and ceased charging customers of Sask Energy the consumer carbon tax, we changed the law that took the onus from officers and directors and basically made the minister individually the individual on whom federal sanctions would fall. So that initially was Dustin Duncan, who, you know, kind of said he might be going to carbon jail at one point. So I'm now the.
He actually texted me this morning. He asked when SVAN's throwing the party.
Yeah, well, I mean, so that fell on Dustin. It falls on me now. So I'm literally getting CRA bills to me personally for $192 million right now. So. Which is kind of, I put them up on my fridge, and I tell my son when he wanted a new PlayStation, like, look, Dad owes $192 million. You're not getting a new PlayStation right now, but which is kind of flippant. But I mean, we'll see what happens when I have to go and renew my mortgage, how that all works. But yeah, this is what the federal government are looking to do. So with regard to SaskPower on the industrial carbon tax, the other side, you know, we'd be looking at something similar, but none of those sanctions actually fall into place until 2030. So there's a significant lead time before we need to directly worry about any of that. But as we were proven right on the consumer carbon tax, which the federal government, you know, removed, we were proven entirely right on that.
Their first order of business under Carney.
Yeah, I fully expect we're going to be proven entirely right on the industrial carbon tax as well, particularly as it relates to electricity production. The output-based system that we were forced to put into place in Saskatchewan to avoid the federal backstop, which is catastrophically terrible. 80% of that, or nearly 80%, 75 to 80%, is paid by one company, and that company is SaskPower. which is a Crown-owned utility, which have to pass that cost along the industrial carbon tax directly to consumers. So talk about a misnamed program on the industrial C tax. This is paid by people who have no option but to heat their homes. This is the most outrageously stupid tax that you could ever possibly imagine on SaskPower, which even in the Liberals telling that this is supposed to change behavior, that there's a price signal that you're going to change behavior. You have no option when it's -40 whether you're going to turn the power on. And SaskPower have no option but to continue to produce power with what we have and what our existing assets are. So to say that this makes no sense on about 10 different levels, and I fully predict we're going to be proven entirely right on this as well.
Well, this picture I'm showing right now, that was taken in wintertime, though. That's reason why it looks so smoky. It's not smoke. It's actually steam. It's the water that comes up with the coal, because this is taken yesterday at Shand. I don't think Shand might have been down here, but Poplar River as well. It's what's coming out there is mostly steam and carbon dioxide. It's not, particulate matter as much, because we've put, what used to be called clean coal, particulate scrubbers on this. I want to go over a few more questions before we run out of time, because we are rapidly running out of time, folks, here. Stacy just posted here, so exciting that everyone had worked so hard. What are your thoughts on the EV mandate?
Well, where to start? Actually, Premier Smith talked about this yesterday or 2 days ago. We did a joint caucus meeting in Lloydminster, and she made the point that under the federal EV mandate, there would be a requirement for 40,000 vehicles in Alberta, EV vehicles, to be sold next year. Right now, there are 8,000 EV vehicles in Alberta in total. I mean, again, just entirely unrealistic and, indicative of kind of this fairy dust world that the left live in, where somehow by government diktat they can change consumer preference. The reality is that, not a lot of folks here in Saskatchewan want to have an electric vehicle. There's are specific circumstances where I think maybe it makes sense for families to have one. But, when I'm driving back home to Meadow Lake, once or twice a week, it's 600 plus kilometers. Well, I can't get there on one charge, and they don't work when it's -40 by and large. So that doesn't make any sense. And driving around on northern roads in the provincial forest, that sort of thing. I mean, no, I'll use my Silverado, thank you very much. But and I think that's where a lot of consumers have landed in this space.
Well, for example here, so Josh Biggs commented a little bit here. Now, the reason I bring up Josh is because he was hugely enthusiastic about buying the first F-150 Lightning in Estevan. I posted pictures of that thing. He got rid of it before the end of his first winter, because it basically doubled the amount of time it took him to drive to Calgary, and he runs an oil field business, so he had to go to Calgary on a regular basis, and he had to charge it for about 2 hours every 2 hours he drove. But I do have a few questions here, and Brown, bear with me for a second, so I've got to pile through these, and Roman and I will discuss more in a minute. By keeping coal going, and this is nerding out for most people, they wouldn't get it, but you're actually putting water into whatever heat energy into whatever body of water you're using. In Boundary Dam, the dam was specifically built for that reservoir to take the heat from the coal station.
Yeah.
If the two sites being considered, and I don't know if the map will show very well here, the two sites being considered are Rafferty and Boundary. Now, that doesn't show very well. I apologize. If you keep Boundary Dam going, what that means is that the thermal capacity of the reservoir to take additional heat from, let's say, 2 nuclear units, I don't know if you can do it or not. Does that mean that if by keeping coal going for a while, that almost puts Rafferty as a default, because there is nothing putting heat into Rafferty? Does that impact the site selection process, which I understand is nearing its final stages?
Well, it's a really good question, Brian. So I'm going to try and not be super long in the answer, because this is a highly technical answer on a couple of fronts, one of which is licensing through the CNSC application process, which we are going to be initiating in the relatively near future. You usually designate a number of sites through that licensing process because of a variety of reasons that go along with the consideration by the CNSC on how it works. So we are identifying a number of sites. Those would be a couple of them, but specifically they'll be much more defined once we get into the regulatory process. As far as the actual reservoir heating issue, we've had additional work done on that. Water Security Agency have been engaged in that process. I think it would be fair to say that there is not the degree of concern that there may have been at one point about the implications for reservoir temperature that there might have been. So, we're going to work through that and really make sure we have that right. But it's a man-made reservoir, and it was created in order to support power generation. So I think that's a part of the consideration here as well. But that's a process we're going through, and it's an issue that's been raised, and it's an issue that we've been taking seriously as well.
So, Jeremy, you have to go here pretty soon. Bronwyn, I'll give you one more chance here, and then Jeremy, when you leave, Bronwyn and I are going to discuss for a little bit.
Well, I mean, there are a number of things I still could ask. I guess just going back really quickly to EV rigs, I'm reminded of the fact that the feds can really do none of this. Right. I mean, that I think one should also remember when we're talking about the legalities. And of course, you know that very well, Jeremy. I mean, they can't weigh in on specific micromanaging of industries such as EVs. I mean, and so just try it. But they do seem to be doubling down on that one. And I noticed that, which is interesting. I think that on coal, they can't do that either under Section 92A. And that's precisely why we did try to entrench in our own constitution that idea that power generation and natural resource production is ours and it's provincial. And, that's just the reality of the thing. So I think, it'll be interesting to see, I guess, from your perspective too, how the feds react going forward. I think some of the venom is maybe out of the relationship, we hope. But I mean, I guess in having this conversation, I think it's sad in a way when we're kind of speaking to the converted here in this audience, and everyone is so supportive, and that's wonderful to see. I guess just from a kind of quote unquote communications perspective, Jeremy, was there any thought of maybe bringing this up when the national eyes were on the province, when the premiers were here and Carney was here and so on, in terms of kind of going big and going home on some of these demands, including, hey, we're going to run coal. I mean, just because I guess people have such a right to know that and should be having to debate and know about this more than just on this podcast, right?
Well, I would say, we've been kind of working through this process internally. You know how that all works, Bronwyn, as far as being in a position to make a formal communication to our employees, and this was when we were able to do that. So I'm glad we were able to. With regard to the federal government, I'm kind of in a trust but verify sort of space right now. I've been honestly encouraged by conversations that I've been having with their most senior officials and ministers. I have been encouraged by that, but they're also the Liberal Party of Canada, and we need to see action. We actually need to start to see things moving. I think that was the message from Premier Smith and Premier Moe just a couple of days ago in Lloydminster. They need to actually show us that they are going to be delivering on the conversations which have been positive, which have been encouraging. We need to start seeing it for real. And we're going to know in the next number of months whether it's for real or not for real. Mm-hmm. And, I'm prepared to work with them through that process. I think there are areas we can actually cooperate. I do think that they have a more pragmatic outlook from the top. Whether that translates, though, into actual policy delivery in legislative amendments, for example, on C-69, or the other actual technical impediments that have been holding back the development of our industries, we'll see. And we're going to be, obviously holding them accountable. And I'm prepared to give them a bit of time here, but we will know soon enough whether this is all words or whether this is real. So the trust but verify.
So, Jeremy, I just got one last question for you here before you have to take off. I wrote that I think this is one of the the most significant policy decisions this government's made in the last 10 years and will be for several years to come. Not just for the cost of the money you're going to spend, but the money you're going to save, because I don't think he actually said how much cheaper it's going to be to rebuild than to build new generation.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's right, Brian. I mean, what I've said, I said this on Bray's show yesterday as well. I mean, the decision that we made really was a policy choice predicated on energy security and reliability. That was really the fundamental core of the reason we made the decision. But obviously, we've done significant work on the financial elements of all of this as well, and the capital cost of refurbishment and sustainment of coal versus new build gas. I mean, it's under half, and it could be even more than under half, but it's under half of the cost. So, obviously on all of those fronts, it makes sense. But I really do want to underline, though, the policy reason we made the decision was around energy security and reliability, which is the same reason why we're going to be bridging to nuclear, because we have the uranium here as well in Saskatchewan. We need to build the value add around that. We're working on what that's going to look like, but we have the uranium here as well for energy security reasons. That's why it makes sense to go to nuclear.
So I think that's a good point to wrap up for Jeremy, because you have to take off here pretty soon. Really wanted to thank you first of all, for letting Pipeline Online break this story here, because I've been writing about this day and night, literally sometimes till 3 a.m. And it makes a huge difference for all of us here. Bronwyn and I, we're going to stick on for a little bit. We're going to hash out this more. Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison, and folks, stick around for a bit. We had 140 people here. If you want to ask any questions or put some other things, I have to point out that Mayor Tony Cernick of Estevan said the Bass love their water steamed. All right. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, Brahman. So we got 141 people here. If you have any questions that you'd like to bring up or comments, now is the time, because this is there's a lot to hash out here. Brahman, what were your thoughts of what Jeremy just said?
Well, I think certainly, better late than never. I think that it's incredibly important decision for the province and for the economy of the province, and all the points that Jeremy just made. I mean, energy and security, reliability, but also affordability, and to ensure that going forward, power rates remain reasonable for the workings of the province. I touched on it a little bit at the end. I think that it's a bit unfortunate maybe that when the national eye was on the province, when premiers were here and the PM was here, that we, as a province couldn't have said, hey, and by the way, we're running coal, only because, the media is so weird on this, other than you and a few others, in that, I mean, for example, the coal announcement I noticed, in the Globe and Mail was on the report on business pages, but not in the main part of the newspaper. And I just think, now, what does it take? I mean, this is a pretty big story for a province. It's a pretty big story when we're talking about energy security. And, not to just pick on the Globe and Mail. I mean, the mainstream approach is, well, that's an inconvenient truth, and so let's just maybe not talk about it or ignore it or stick our heads in the sand and pretend there's still going to get wind and solar and hydro from Manitoba, or there's going to be a national corridor. Part of this is always a communications thing in politics, and I guess I feel that maybe that could have been brought up when as I say, the national eye was on us. Similarly with the demands that Premier Smith and Premier Moe put out, and they're the usual suspects, right? Like, don't do the cap on oil and gas, don't do Bill C-69 the way it was. I mean, they can't really anyway, because the Supreme Court weighed in on that. But the old list of demands, right? And Jeremy was saying just now that those are things, trust but verify. We want action now. Might have been not a bad opportunity to raise some of that when all the premiers were here. And I mean that from Alberta's perspective too. I know it was all, let's get along now and have a positive meeting. And I do get that. It's not always sometimes though about being negative. It's just about being assertive and forceful. And that is the key, I think, to a good relationship with the West and within the Federation, frankly. I mean,
okay, so I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that, because, it's a valid thing that's saying it could have been said maybe a few weeks ago, but I'm going to say this could have been said 3 years ago. And
sure.
I think in a way you guys did. Okay. And you in particular, I know that as a cabinet minister, you swear an oath saying that you can't talk about what was discussed in cabinet, and I totally get that. But the reality is that it's clear from the indications, and anyone who is listening right now, go on Pipeline Online, read the story. At the very end, I posted about 12 stories that showed the process of how we got to this. I talked about the Drawing the Line white paper Premier Moe released a few years ago, and then the Saskatchewan First Act, which you, Bronwyn, introduced, and that laid out the tribunals, which would then going to evaluate what would the cost of clean electricity regulations be. Ken Frum worked on that as part of your tribunal. So in some ways, to me, it almost seems like the answer was self-evident when you first stood up and said, we're introducing the Saskatchewan First Act. We knew the answer then. So why did it take until now to actually make this decision? And I realize it's a hard question, but that's why I'm asking.
Well, and I think part of the analysis of that, I mean, I think it goes back to, the Saskatchewan First Act and entrenching it in our own constitution that, hey, under the Constitution, we have that exclusive jurisdiction over natural resources and power generation, was also, a line in the sand. And I think that people have to remember, and I think the feds have to remember, that they actually can't step into this space and never should have or could have, really, legally, constitutionally. And might we have asserted that maybe more forcefully earlier, and that's hindsight, and there are a lot of things that come into that, of course, but here we are now. It's incredibly important. All I'm saying is that I think we not forget that this isn't about, when people talk about getting along with the feds or cooperative federalism, or let's all be congenial and cordial, part of that within a federation is not stepping on each other's toes constitutionally. And I think Saskatchewan,
or turning their lights off in winter.
Indeed. And what I often find interesting, I mean, when we're talking about the provinces, is that Quebec, as I've often said, will be ideologically on side with things that the federal Liberals have been doing. But when it comes to provincial rights, they are consistent every single time. It's like, you cannot weigh into that. And I just think it's important to remember, whether it's EV regs or coal or C-69 or the oil and gas cap, they simply can't. And to Jeremy's point about waiting and seeing on some of this stuff, I mean, with EVs, it is a bit worrying that the feds seem to be buckling down or doubling down on that one, because
got their blinders on.
They've
no
got
reality.
And so where does that leave some of the other ones? And I think some of these other areas, oil and gas cap and so on, how will they respond on Saskatchewan's position on coal remains to be seen. Obviously, we hope that they'll just let it go, and it's not going to be a thing about courts and the rest. But we do have very strong arguments if and when they would come after us on that. First of all, because they can't. Constitutionally, they cannot come after power generation. They can't. And I think part of the work of the tribunal, the independent tribunal, which was set up as a result of the Saskatchewan First Act, was in arming us with the evidence that was necessary in case they ever do come after us, to say this is what it would cost.
Devil's advocate on that. I mean, it's good that you did have the numbers and had real things and had the evidence, as you say, but a person could also say this was self-evident. We knew the answer from the beginning, and everyone knew that who actually had two brain cells.
Sure, but I think that if you always have to think in terms of this, when you start parting ways with federal mandates, as we were just talking about with Minister Harrison, we talked about it just now. I mean, there are these things in the coal phase out, which talk about putting people in jail who aren't following it on behalf of the province. I mean, this is where they were coming from. It's a very legal response, right? And so in turn, I think it was very important that we establish evidence of the impact of the clean electricity regulations. This isn't just about, I mean, we know that shutting down coal affects people's jobs horribly. We know that the lights could go on, but this was about the impact of what they were saying should replace coal.
So one of our criticisms,
regulations.
I've read through almost every comment on this. Honest to God, folks, this is probably, for Pipeline Online, since its inception 3.5 years ago, this was the most shared story, most impactful. The comments were not, I will admit, I mean, most people follow this are of a certain mindset, but almost universally supportive. And the few that I did find, I had to go digging for negative stuff. I went on Reddit. Now, the Reddit r/Saskatchewan site, I tried it out about a year ago and my blood pressure kept going like this. I discovered that it is very much groupthink. You get voted up or down on your opinions. And if you're voted to a negative, you're not allowed to talk. You're literally voted off the island. So the Saskatchewan Reddit thread is very, very left-wing, anti-Saskatchewan party, virally anti-Mo, anti-anything right-wing, anything oil and gas. And yet I went on there yesterday and I actually found a high number of comments supportive of doing this. And I just want to read some of them here. I'm just going to post a few of them here. That's why it's easier to read. This one person said, I'm not an expert, but that's my take. I'm all for being greener, but at the same time, it's like people buying brand new electric vehicles and not sticking to their old 2008 car that works just fine. Another person said, there are 3 power generators. You want to replace one of small modular reactors. It's going to be less people. With coal, though, they're going to shut those mines down and people will just be out of a job. They'd have to move away and find a new job just to totally relocate their lives. Another one said, and this is impactful. I'm just going to put it on screen because people need to see this. Hold on here. It's not 100% ideal, but it sure beats freezing in the dark. And, you know, and Jeremy touched on this towards the end, and I think it's really important that people understand the broader implications. What are the real, no bullshit options for Saskatchewan as of today? Because as of today, according to federal regulation, the conventional coal, which is currently about 1,400 megawatts, you know, I guess 110 of that or so is we call carbon capture. Well, let's call it 1,400 megawatts, give or take, which in wintertime accounts for up to 44% of our power generation on a cold day when there's no wind. We would have to shut that down, all of it, in 4 years, 6 months, and 10 days from today. Now, if you were to say today, you know, cabinet meets on Wednesday. So if they met next Wednesday and said, we're going to build 3 more natural gas plants, the size of Aspen, which is being built near Lanigan, largely to support the BHP mine. And it's basically the same as what Moose Jaw. If we were to say today, we need to go ahead and do this, we could not get those 3 power plants built before that deadline of 4 years, 6 months, and 10 days. I mean, and you've been at that cabinet table. How does the government look at that and say, look, this is a hard deadline and the lights have to stay on, and you know, we've run out of options. I personally think that's a big reason why this announcement had to come out now, because we have no other option and we will not get nuclear built in time to keep those lights on.
Yeah, and it ultimately becomes a cumulative assessment of reality, right? I mean, I think that we came to be increasingly aware of the fact that this pile on of regulations, most damagingly in the coal space, the clean electricity regulations, which again, just 6 months ago, the federal government was insisting would happen. And was very reluctant to water down. Keep in mind, they're still on the books.
Right. Oh, and I guess apparently the past couple of days I've been occupied of dealing with all this, but apparently I think he's the new leader of the federal NDP, Mr. Davies, introduced a bill in Parliament just like in the past 48 hours or 72 hours, saying that by 2030, Canada should be 100% renewable generation. You know, I mean, the utter ridiculousness of that. I mean, even if we said, yes, we are going to do that, how the hell could we build that much power generation? And what happens when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine?
Yeah, and keep in mind that some of these federal policies that we've talked about so many times are on the books. Oil and gas cap, federal fuel standard, EV rates doubling down just the other day. I mean, there's there's a great clean electricity. There's a great irony to this talk of carnies. I mean, talk about trust but verify, about, streamlining things. One of the ways that they're thinking of streamlining is through something which the Supreme Court has deemed to be unconstitutional, which is Bill C-69. Come on. I mean,
the ideological thing of the NDP leader saying that, my jaw dropped. I mean, there's no concept of reality. This is another comment that came on Reddit here. It said, Saskatchewan has 3 plants. Do people think extending it's a good thing when the only other option at this moment is freezing in winter? Yes.
That's intensely positive that there's come to be a recognition of not only the economics of it, but the mechanics of it for the province, right? I mean, if people can, and that's what I mean. I mean, again, very positive announcement, but in terms of just optimizing the discussion and debate about this, not only within the province do people have a right to kind of learn more about this, but nationally, there should be a much greater recognition of the individual reality of individual provinces and their power grids. And so silly talk about corridors is just, when Manitoba has no hydro to give, it's just irrational, right?
So let's talk about that, because Josh just brought up interconnects. Now, right now, under construction, about 15 miles west of Estevan is a $1 billion interconnect to North Dakota. It'll add 500 megawatts to the current 150 megawatts we have. I was initially very much harsh against it, because I thought, why are we shutting down our coal plants to buy coal-fired power from North Dakota? Because on any given day, they have 40-50% wind, but they also have up to 44% coal. So we would be shutting down our coal plants and those 1,100 jobs to buy coal power from North Dakota. That didn't make any sense to me. But there are arguments to be made, and this is a very long, detailed thing about frequency, and I've written about a lot, that having interconnects does a lot to stabilize your grid's frequency, so you don't have a blackout like what happened in Spain, where John Gormley got to sit in the dark. So I mean, that's an important thing, the interconnects. But as you just said, and Rupen Pania, the CEO of SaskPower, has said on the record, Manitoba Hydro has no more to give. Now, this 500 megawatts that they're taking off from Minnesota, that might be a little bit, but long term, if every jurisdiction, including Saskatchewan, is looking at doubling their own domestic power demands, they won't have anything to give. We have got to be domestically self-sustaining, and maybe we can share a little bit back and forth. But for instance, a lot of people say, well, if wind isn't blowing here, it's blowing somewhere. So if you just build enough interconnects, enough power lines, we can have enough wind. I did a story about, I think it was a year ago or 2 years ago. It was in July. It was July 13th. There was no wind at the same time from Pincher Creek, Alberta, all the way through Saskatchewan to St. Leon, Manitoba, all the way down to the Texas Panhandle through the Southwest Power Pool. There was effectively no wind in 3 provinces and 14 states at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it was a different conversation until this announcement. I mean, let's be honest, right? It was a different conversation over the last few years about, are we sort of working within these federal mandates? We're not going to follow CER because it's destructive, but are we going to? And now again, on coal, we've turned the page. We're kind of going our own way. And so I think, more power is never a bad thing. I think the connections that way, the interconnects, are not a bad thing, because they bolster what can be bolstered. But in some ways, I think we should also look back on the fact that we're very lucky that we have a one crown power generator in this province. When you look at the patchwork that they have in Alberta, for example, and of course in the States, where you've had, the Texas power outage was a disaster a few years ago, and all this conversation now around AI data centers and the enormous power that is going to be required for those. Alberta's actively canvassing for a site. But there are a lot of people out there who say that they do not have the power grid strength for that. So we're in a good place. Like, we are in a good, it's good this is happening now. We're basically, we have a harmonized structure as a province and as one power generator, which is a very good thing. And so strength to the crowns on that one. And, where we go from here, I think we can just optimize and build this out now. It's extremely positive for energy security for sure, but even for some of these new opportunities around, AI data centers and the rest, which everyone's talking about.
I want to show some people here I've loaded some images to show exactly what we're talking about here, okay? So I'll start from the beginning. Hold on here. So first of all, this is Boundary Dam Power Station in wintertime. I took this picture yesterday. That's Shand Power Station. That's one unit. And we didn't get a chance to ask Jeremy, but on the left-hand side, there is room to build a second unit. It was originally planned. This is Poplar River. Now, I've never been in Poplar River, but I'm going to make sure that changes this year. Unit 4, this is the one that he's talking about. This is the first unit that's going to be rebuilt. It has been shut down. I'm not sure if it's certain if it was disconnected from the grid. It was supposed to be disconnected, but that's the first thing they're going to do is they're going to refurbish it, recertify it, and put it back in the grid. That's 150 megawatts. So that's, again, Unit 4 right here. This is Unit 5. Again, another 150 megawatts. That I presume that will probably be the next one on the agenda. And then this is Unit 6. This is a 300 megawatt unit. So each of the Poplar River units are 300 megawatts. Shand is 300 megawatts, and Unit 6 at Boundary Dam is 300 megawatts. So we're looking at, refurbishing, life extending these. The cost is measured in hundreds of millions of dollars to do this per unit, as opposed to billions. The people need to realize that we have seen an enormous price escalation in building natural gas power plants. So the price for the Chinook Power Station at Swift Current was $605 million, and that was on time and on budget. Moose Jaw was $825 million. That was a 36% increase from Swift Current. Aspen, which is currently under construction, according to last year's annual report, a new one will be issued on Monday, for SaskPower, said the price will be between 1.4 and 1.7 billion. These are all essentially clones of each other to build the same thing. So we're looking at an escalation. If you take the midpoint of that 1.55 billion, that is an 88% escalation from Moose Jaw to Lanigan. And the implications of that are enormous, because building natural gas, everyone used to say, well, it's cheap. The gas is cheap. Building them is cheap. Well, now it's not cheap. And the gas is, all the costs on the future markets are all in the $4 range for the next 4 years, according to ACO Futures. We've been paying $2 gas or less for most of the last 15 years. I'm sorry, I'm blathering here, but these are things that I've been really digging into, and a lot of people just don't understand what's going on.
You have been digging into it, and I think that's one other thing I'm going to say. I mean, just how much work you've done on this through the years, Brian, and I think everyone who's online right now and listening can vouch for that. I mean, you've banged away on this drum of the wind dilemma. Done work that really no one has done, as far as I know, in terms of actually analyzing not only the hard data, but standing in front of these things and saying, listen, nothing's blowing right now. We need to do this. So, kudos to you too on all of this stuff, on how we got to this point as a province, as a collective. I think the other thing, I mean, and you raised it a little bit earlier too on the CCS discussion. I think we are owed, as a country and as a province, more analysis of the economics of that, where we're at with that. And I don't mean by anyone in particular, just collectively, we should be analyzing the economics of that. And instead of hearing these glib, hey, stick a CCS thing on that, or do that on, as I said, the feds were doing until very recently on natural gas, untested, unpiloted, completely massive cost. It would have been a nightmare if we had ever said, oh, okay, well, we'll do that. And just sort of a state of play where we're at. And Jeremy alluded to that a little bit in terms of the economics of that. But I think that's something we kind of maybe look into a little bit more in the coming months. It's just, now that we've turned this page on coal, which is excellent, and now we're kind of going our own way a little bit on the energy security side. Do we do this? Do we do this for economic reasons? Because if we're not going to do it because we're told we have to do it, do we still do it? And I think that's worthy of some discussion and debate going forward.
Well, one of the things I've told almost everyone I've interviewed on about these power issues over the last few years, what are my motivations for this? And here's what I've told pretty much everyone. My wife right now is 2 blocks to the west here, working in the emergency room at SVAN St. Joseph's Hospital. I don't want her doing CPR on your grandma or you and have the lights go out.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
That has been my motivation for why I've been writing so much about, the stability of power generation. We've heard for years that, from many politicians, including our premier, that, the priorities are sustainability, reliability, and affordability. But it's been my contention, and I think that, the over 100 stories I've written about the, reliability of wind and solar, is that reliability trumps everything. That, when the power goes out, people will pull out a generator, which is going to belch black smoke and cost $100 a day for gasoline just to keep the lights on their farm or on their house. And that happened here near Estevan a few years ago when we had a big blizzard, 4 days of no power. So the reality is that, we have to keep the power on. And I think that this announcement by the government, the reality that we must keep the lights on no matter what. We have to use what works. I think the final acknowledgement of that, and start going back from, your work with the Saskatchewan First Act, I think finally, and many people have said this online, thank God someone is making sense now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and it's the personification, if you like, of Saskatchewan First, right? I mean, it's legally the right thing to do, constitutionally the way to go, and of course, from a common sense perspective, economically and otherwise, it has to be there. So we've got the laws behind us, the Constitution's behind us in doing this, and we're doing it, and that's excellent. I think on some of these other items that, as I say, Premier Smith and Premier Moe put forward as their list of demands on some of these other oil and gas cap and the rest, I think what'll be interesting in the next few months to look at is what teeth the provinces bring to bear on those, and then
Right.
and then how the feds respond. And
So-
if they, for example, don't do anything against us, quote unquote, on coal, which they really can't, shouldn't, where does that leave the rest of the stuff? And then EV rigs is a perfect example, and it was brought up by one of your listeners right about half an hour ago. I mean, the thing is, there's this gray area with environmental regulation in the Constitution where it's kind of the provinces, kind of the feds. And let's not forget, on the carbon tax, the federal government had to bring down the trump card of a national emergency, peace, order, and good government to actually argue that they had the jurisdiction to even impose the carbon tax on provinces. If they do that on EV rigs, they're going to lose. Right. So we shouldn't adhere to something unconstitutional, but they're doubling down. It's interesting. So it just remains to be seen where this goes.
We could probably go on for hours here, but I think we need to let some people go and get on with their day. Bronwyn, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, just a pleasure being here, Brian. And I think it's a great announcement by the province.
Folks, this has been, honest to God, I do think that writing the story that came out on Wednesday was the most impactful piece of journalism that I have done in my entire career. It really was talked about saving, as we mentioned before, 2 coal mines, 3 power plants, and 2 communities for possibly decades to come. If we put carbon capture on it, that could give generations of more oil production in Southeast Saskatchewan. And the fact that the Saskatchewan government has, come to its senses and said, look, this far, no further, we're going to keep the lights on. I think that is huge. So with that, folks, we're going to call it an end for today. And thank you very much. I've been talking to, I think we're going to have probably Zach Maurer from Arizona Lithium to talk about what's going on in that space. And possibly a new industry here. Thank you very much for your time.